Hey, I'm John Gordon with Positive University, and I am with my friend John O'Leary, one of the most inspiring people you will ever meet. But it's not just his words that inspire, it's his life. And John, tell us about your story because I believe that's your most inspiring part of you and your journey.
Well, first of all, I am honored, Brother John Gordon, to be on your show and to be with your friends and followers. For those who don't know me, my name is John O'Leary. I'm a Midwestern guy. I'm out of St. Louis, Missouri. I'm married, have 4 children. I really feel like I have an awesome, shockingly blessed life. And I wake up each day grateful for it, like just totally in awe of the life that I'm lucky enough to walk each day. The story you're asking me about, I'm assuming, if this is the one, is the turning point in my life. And it happened at age 9. I was kind of a curious kid. I saw older boys in my neighborhood a few weeks earlier playing with fire and gasoline. And these were guys I looked up to. And I wanted to be just like these old timers. And I assumed, Mr. Gordon, if these guys can do that and get away with it, me too. So that weekend it was on. My mom and dad were gone. I walked into their garage. I bent over a can of gasoline, stooped down next to it, tried to pour a little bit on top, just a safe amount. Right now, I would imagine your female listeners are thinking, what is wrong with this guy? And all your brothers, all the men listening right now are thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder if he put the G.I. Joe guys in first or second. They did the same stupid thing, man. Every little boy is guilty of something like this with fireworks or gasoline or hairspray or ants. Who knows? I'm over the can. Before the liquid came out, the fumes rushed out of the container, created this massive explosion, split the can in two, John, launched me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, covered me in gasoline, and quite literally set my world on fire. And that's the starting point.
And after that, you're in the hospital. Talk about that.
Yeah. So I spent 5 months in the hospital and then a couple of years in surgery and therapy afterwards. What I remember most distinctly about the hospital, it's all very vivid, maybe surprisingly enough. 30 plus years later, I still remember it almost every day. It's odd. But I remember distinctly laying in the emergency room. I'm 9. I'm burned on 100% of my body. 87% was third degree. It's a death sentence. Even today, it's a total death sentence.
87%?
Was third degree, but 100% of my body in total sum was burned at least second degree. So these are tragic, terrible numbers. And I'm looking at my body, I'm looking at my hands, I'm looking at the damage. And I remember shutting my eyes on that Saturday morning, January 17th, 1987. And the thought that I kept coming back to, John, was, oh my gosh, my dad is going to kill me when he finds out what I did to his garage, man. He is going to kill me. And I wasn't thinking about possible rounds of amputation or, I wonder what my first surgery will be or when will I get out of here. My very first thought, this kind of fear-based thought, goes to my dad and the wrath that I'm assuming he's going to bring on to me. I hear his voice down the hall. My dad was a business owner. He was kind of type A, a veteran, great guy, but a disciplinarian. And I blew up his house. So I knew how he would react. I'm laying there in the bed. I hear his voice down the hall, John, and he says to some nurse, where is my boy, John? Where's my boy, John? And I remember hearing the echo of the line coming toward me thinking, oh my gosh, the old man has come to finish me off. Like this thing is over. And this nurse brings my dad into this room. I remember he pulls back this curtain, this old, and he was old. He was 41. This old guy walks in, and by the way, it's all perspective, isn't it? When you're 9, 41 is old. Now it's pretty young. This guy comes into the room, points down, and what my father says to me shocked me. Here's what he says, John, look at me when I'm talking to you. So I look up at my mean dad, and then he says, I have never been so proud of anybody in my entire life. And my little buddy, you look at me when I'm talking to you today, this morning, little man, I am just proud to be your dad. And then my dad says, I love you. I love you. I love you. John, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, nobody told my dad what happened. He doesn't know, man. Maybe I can get away with it. But for those of us who have children, or you've seen children in your life, or you have a heart at all for kids or loved ones or friends, you realize exactly what happened there. My dad shifted his entire mindset from where I think we can all live. And by the way, John, you are a guiding light encouraging us to move away from this. But many of us live in this place of fear. And it's all about all the things that can go wrong, have gone wrong, or might go wrong later on. It's this great place of negativity. My dad shifted his entire heart and his entire life from there into this place of faith and love and optimism and joy and positivity. He changed first, leaders. I caught. Right. But my dad was the one who changed first. And I think there's an important lesson somewhere baked within that one.
That's a great lesson. What happened to your hands?
Yeah. So for those, I know some of your listeners listen, others watch and listen. 100% burn. That's the entire body. 87%. That's my neck to my toes, 3rd degree, meaning skin's never again going to come back there. So what do you do about that? Well, what they had to do is take skin from my scalp. And surgery after surgery, week after week, and then month after month, they take a fine layer of skin, they waffle it out, so they triple it in size, and they piece it back together. But they start at your chest because they want to cover that part of your body that's most important. Then they move into your back, and then your rear end, and then your legs and arm. So they work outward toward the fingers. And for me, they'd already turned gangrenous by the time they got around to it. And John, you called it out. I remember waking up from a surgery, and my dad's just awesome. We will run out of time talking about my dad. But my dad was to my right, looking down and crying. And my dad never cried when I was in the hospital. So I wasn't sure what was up with my dad. So I look up and I say, Dad, what are you crying about, man? What are you crying about? And my dad says, John, I'm sorry, but they had to amputate your fingers today in surgery. And for me, if you ask me later on, John, what was your low water mark? For me, that was it. To wake up from surgery, to know that I was going to get out of here. I was very clear I was going to go home one day. But then to find out from my dad that they've taken my fingers, which means they've taken my ability to hold things. They've taken my ability to work. They've taken my ability to write, to hold a little girl's hand, to live a life that has any meaning at all. I've taken it all away from me. They might as well have just taken my life. So I'm kind of yelling at my dad, and the day is really hard, John. And at the end of the day, and this is so beautiful for the doctors and nurses and shepherds out there who are encouraging others, but my doctor, his name was Vachiavajan, came into the room. It's late at night. The guy probably had an 18-hour day, sits at my bedside, looks at me and says, John, I wanted to come and personally apologize for taking your fingers today. I said, well, I kind of just sat there, didn't say anything. And he says, John, I need you to know that I did not take your life today. I've given it to you. And then he went on to say, you may not become a carpenter anymore, but you can become a general contractor, or you can run a thriving business. He said, you may not become a major league ball player anymore, because he knew that was my dream. But John, you can become an owner of one, or you can manage a team. He said, you may not become a courtroom reporter, but you can become a judge, and you'll do it phenomenally. Brother, I have not taken your life. I've given it to you. You've got to believe that. And the best is yet to come. That is a conversation. I get emotional thinking about it, that this little exhausted dad, he had 3 of his own kids. He's married. He's exhausted. He's completely overworked and overwhelmed, that he had with a 9-year-old little nobody. And in doing so, I think it's one of the reasons why you and I are on this show today. I think it's one of the reasons I'm able to hold a phone and hold a laptop and hold a girl's hand, my wife. I have an awesome life for a whole lot of reasons, but that doctor and that conversation were a part of it, John.
I was going to ask you about that, because now you're one of the most popular speakers in the world, incredibly successful author, a great book called On Fire, which I think is amazing that you took that title, right? You used that title from something that was so tragic. And now you wrote about being on fire, the passion that you live with, the purpose you live with. But take us back now to the 9-year-old boy. You heard that, that great speech from the doctor. You heard those great words, those encouraging words. But did you really believe in that moment that your future was full of hope? How does John O'Leary, that boy, become the huge success you are today?
Well, beginning with the fact, and it is a fact, it's not an opinion, almost none of it occurred by myself. Like I'm not that impressive of a guy, candidly. In fact, my book that you referenced, it is a celebration of a hero. But as the reader gets to the end of it, they realize, well, he has never once bragged about himself, because I got very little to brag about, actually. We skipped right over it. But, I didn't come out of even the garage by myself. My brother and my sisters are the reasons why I survived the first few moments of being burned. My dad, I talked about him being in the emergency room, but John, my mom came in directly behind my father. She took my right hand in hers. You got to understand how scary that is for a mother, to take the hand of of a child who's dying and the hand is decrepit. And she looks me in the eyes and she says to me, "Oh, baby, I love you." And I said, "Mom, knock it off with the love. Dad already gave it to me. I've heard enough of it. Am I going to die?" And when I asked her that, what I was really looking for was hope. And instead, she provided truth, which leaders, that's what we need right now in this marketplace. My mother looked at me in the eyes and says, "Baby, do you want to die?" And I said, "Mom, I don't want to die. I want to live." And her response was, "Good, then, babe. Then look at me. Take the hand of God. You walk the journey with him, but you fight like you have never fought before." She said, "Your father and I will be with you every step along the way. But baby, you got to own this. You've got to fight. You got to want it." And so, John, on that day, it was January 17th, 1987. My sisters and my brother had just saved my life. My dad had just been nice to me. Now my mother is saying, "Fight, take the hand of God, but baby, own it." After that moment, and with the encouragement of so many other volunteers and leaders and people supporting from around the community, around the world, President Reagan wrote a letter, Pope John Paul II, trees were being planted in Israel. It was a global effort. Before social media, people were saying, we're with you. You're not on your own. And as a little boy who frequently felt on his own, it did make a difference to have people supporting me.
And who was the famous baseball player or baseball manager or announcer that came to see you?
It's such an awesome story. I have no idea if we have time to really unpack it all, but his name was Jack Buck. And so for the baseball or the football fans in the room, you may recognize the name Joe Buck. Joe has called the last 22 World Series and probably a dozen or so Super Bowls. Joe's a celebrity, a phenomenal announcer, and a great guy in and of his own right. I love Joe, but it was his father who was my hero. Because I'm a Cardinal fan here in the Midwest. I'm a St. Louis guy. The Cardinals are our team. And the way we watched baseball back then and the way I still watch baseball is to listen. And for us, the voice was Jack Buck. And long story made very short, John Gordon, the day after I'm burned, okay, I'd never met Jack Buck in my life. I just listened to him every night. I'm stretched out in a hospital bed, tied down, can't move my arms or my legs. I'm on a trach, which means I can't breathe, eat, or drink by myself, or talk, and my eyes are swollen shut. It's a pretty lousy situation. You're tied down in a bed, unable to do anything. You can feel and fear, and you can be sad and mad, and I was occasionally. And occasionally I'd come out of the darkness back into the light. I would dream and pray and hope and imagine. I'd set crazy goals like going home, and I'd listen. And the day after I'm burned, I'm in a hospital bed listening primarily to the beeps going on around me. And then my door opens up. I hear footsteps, a chair gets pulled across the floor. I hear somebody cough. And then immediately, like boom, I recognize it immediately. I recognize the voice of a guy I'd never met live before, but knew his voice instantaneously. It was Jack Buck. He's in my room next to me and he says, loud and clear and deep, "Kid, wake up. Wake up." Great words, man. Wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. Kid, are you listening? And John, I remember like nodding my head as best I could, fully beat down on this bed, to which he responds, "Good, keep fighting." The man walked out of my room and my life was transformed from that moment thereafter. I knew where this thing was going. There was no doubt at all. I learned from my father actually years later that Jack made his way down the hall, started weeping, which, by the way, is not weakness. It's strength. It's love. It's compassion. It's scripturally sound advice to cry. One of the nurses bends down next to one of the only celebrities in St. Louis. She looks up at this guy and says, "Mr. Buck, are you okay?" And the announcer looks back down and says, I'm not sure. The little boy in 408, he won't make it, will he?" And the nurse, and this is the experts, looks up and says, "Mr. Buck, there is absolutely not a chance. It's just his time. Let him go." So this is the diagnosis that Jack has now received on a little boy's life he'd never met before that day. He took it home that night, though. He prayed about it, reflected, and journaled. This is an awesome question. If any of you guys or ladies like to journal, let me encourage you to start if you don't. And if you do, write down this question. The question is, what more can I do? And it is a question that Jack Buck, I've learned later on, asked every night of his life. It led to a Hall of Fame career and I think a Hall of Fame life. Not perfect, but a Hall of Fame career and a Hall of Fame life. What more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? So Jack asked this question that night. And the following day, John Gordon, a little boy named John O'Leary, is hanging out by himself with beeps and buzzes and no skin and no chance. And I'm dying and I'm in darkness. And the door opens up. I hear footsteps, a chair, a cough. And then the voice of Jack Buck says, "Kid, wake up. I'm back. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. See you soon." The way he dropped the mic that day was "see you soon." And he came back into my room over the next 5 months and lived into that promise of John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. You asked earlier, how did you do it? And I think as we go deeper into this podcast, you're hearing, and so are your listeners, not at all by yourself, man, huh? That's right. I had great doctors, nurses, parents, friends, now announcers serving me every step along the way.
And did you have John O'Leary Day at the ballpark?
Right. We did. I got some cool pictures of it. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. Pushed around in a little wheelchair, big goofy grin on my face the entire night. Jack was like a proud father that night. I think he realized, as much as anybody, he was part of the success story. He was part of the celebration. I'm sure he took a lot of joy in that truth. We broadcast the game that night. And Jack would say things on live radio to this little boy in the wheelchair next to him. He'd say, big microphone in his face, "It's John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. He's with me tonight. Kid, are you having fun?" And I would look up on live radio and I would say back, because I'm shy. I don't say a word to this celebrity the entire night. So he learns I don't talk. He learns I can't stand up. I can't use my hands. I can't do anything. It's a broken, ugly image. If that's what you want to see. The reason John, I follow you, I love you, I read your stuff, and I believe in you, because you're helping people not just see the ugly image. You're not helping them ignore it. It's there. Sometimes it rains. Sometimes we go through struggle. Sometimes markets collapse. Sometimes we get sick. It is there. But it's not all that's there. My problem with mainstream media is that is all they focus on. All the crap, all the garbage, more at 10. It's important that we recognize they're not there to tell us about the news. They're there to sell us 2 minutes of ad space in between whatever garbage they're sending our way. Really, they're there to sell ad space. That's why they put the stories forward they do. Recognize this and then turn it off. It's critical. I think it's critical not to be ignorant, but to not be weighed down by things you can't change. Jack tuned it out. He took home this message that night of a little boy who was struggling. He asked one question: what more can I do? It's simple and it's profound, and we're all too busy frequently to ask it. And I'm telling you right now, should you choose to ask it tonight and again tomorrow night, it's going to transform your life and the life of those you serve. It's a big deal.
I love it. And very, very powerful. What were your teenage years like growing up this way?
Yeah. So, the beautiful thing about being burned, I think, at the age that I was, is sometimes you don't know what you don't know. There's a creation story about Adam and Eve who eventually realized that they're both naked. The good news for your guest today is I didn't know that I was naked almost until I was 23. I just was able to see within my own life the blessing of being here. And I was able to mask those scars and cover up either by doing things that were hard to prove to others and myself that I was worthy, or sometimes masking, if we're being totally transparent today, with alcohol and other things that weren't leading me down the right path, because I was trying to prove to everybody that I was normal. My goal in life was not to thrive or excel or to achieve. It was oddly enough to fit in. And so I just wanted to kind of disappear, be gray like everybody else. That was the big, bold vision for this kid. And my mom and dad, John, about 14 years ago, wrote a book. So I was 28, 29 at that age or whatever. And it's called Overwhelming Odds. And I read this little book that they wrote about the experience they had with their son being burned terribly. It's not my story, it's theirs. And two things transformed my life. Number one was to recognize that I wasn't the only one that got burned. Think about this. I had never thought about what my mom and dad went through, because it's all about me. I'm the one that got burned, poor me. I never thought about what it was like for my brother Jim, age 17, to see his brother aflame. What's that memory like? Well, how does that affect you tomorrow and beyond? I never thought about what it was like for my two sisters to come out of a smoky house worried for themselves until they see their brother in the front yard naked and skinless. What's that memory like for an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old? I never thought about that. And I started thinking about that and still do think about that after reading Mom and Dad's book. The second thing that grabbed me is I'd always seen what happened to me as being bad. And then I read this book and I never counted the miracles and the blessings that were daily within our story. I never taken inventory of how absolutely stunningly blessed I was. Never. Why would I? I just saw the amputations and the scars and the reminder of what I had lost rather than all I had gained. And I read that book, and you can hear it in my heart, I hope. It just changed me. I started to change internally, which is the start. A group of Girl Scouts, there were 3 of them, Mr. Gordon, asked John O'Leary, they called me Mr. O'Leary, if I would share my story. So my first big global presentation took place about 6 minutes from my house to 3 third-grade Girl Scouts. They did not even pay me with a box of Girl Scout cookies. Like, so it's pretty low-income days back then. But I wasn't doing anything, and I don't do it now to be paid. I have a heart for this message, and I think that came across 13 years ago for those girls, and it's come across 1,700 times in front of more than 1 million folks in the few years that have followed.
How did you decide to be a speaker? Did you know that you wanted to do it after that moment?
Right.
What was the turning point?
Usually turning points, there's a few Damascus moments in our lives, but for the most part, that's not our experience. You look back on, I think Steve Jobs talks about this a little bit. It's like a whole lot of little polka dot things that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense when you're going through it. Then you look back and it's a perfect line to where you are. It's a perfect line to where you got today. So it wasn't just the Girl Scouts. One of their dads was a Rotarian, and Dad said, hey, I'd like to have you speak to my Rotary Club. And John, whether it's a podcast like the one today, or a Rotary Club or Southwest Airlines, or you pick the group, when someone says, hey, we want you to share, I try to say yes. When someone asks me for a favor, I try to say yes. And so I said yes to this guy. And then one of the members was a Kiwanis member. One of the Kiwanis members owned a small business. So in the first couple of years, it was just kind of like I was invited. And then there was a turning point where a guy said, man, my marriage was falling apart when I woke up this morning. And I heard this message, and I heard your heart behind it. And I realized that, yes, indeed, miracles still happen, but you got to fight for it. And he said, I want to thank you for saving my marriage. My wife doesn't even know it's happened yet, but it's happened. And so I hear this. You know, I'm getting like gift cards to Starbucks back then, but I realized, man, this is not about me. There's something going on here. And so that might have been the turning point here. And that man say that something within this story is big enough to change someone else's life.
That's huge. You and I met years ago with Ben Newman. It was a local event, and you were just doing local events at the time. Since then, you've become international.
Well, I was your water boy, as I remember. I was your opening act at carrying around your suitcase and just honored to be in the room.
I don't remember that, but I remember meeting you and then you giving this talk and going, that guy's unbelievable. Right. I said, that guy is better than me, and he's incredible, and he's got the crowd, boom. And I thought, what a story. And I was just so inspired when I heard you talk.
Well, let me just respond to that before you move on. John, you were the first published author or real speaker that I'd ever met personally. I met a lot of folks, business owners and the like, but I'd never met a star. And I realized, John, I'm just John Gordon. Yeah, but when you're a young wannabe speaker and maybe I have a book in me somewhere, and then you meet a guy who does these things that you aspire to do, and then you have feedback from that guy afterwards who hugs you on the way out toward his plane, and he says, dude, you were awesome. You had that audience. You're going to do big things in life. That is fuel that can carry you through some pretty low days. And so, John Gordon, you are a big part of the journey that I've tracked in the 9 years or so since we first met.
That means a lot, but I know it's a small part. I also remember the World Leaders Conference. You did an incredible job there, and every event you've done. I mean, I follow you online now. We're friends, but I like to see where you're going, and you're all over the place, speaking everywhere. Obviously, it's not just your own story now. Now you're sharing what your story means in terms of leadership, in terms of life, in terms of building great organizations, in terms of building great teams. Big question, do you have more books in you that you're thinking about writing? What's next with John O'Leary?
Right. Well, thank you for asking. And I believe if you're only doing things for you, you burn out pretty quickly. But when you realize the reason why you're a nurse or a teacher or a professor, why you work at a gas station or why you run your own business or you're in sales or whatever, when you realize there's mission behind it and that you're impacting others through your work and through your tasks and through your life, you realize you can't ever be done. You got to sprint through the tape at the end of a life well lived. So I wrote a book called On Fire. It came out about 2 years ago. It had some pretty cool success, became a #1 national bestseller. It's been translated into, I think, 15 languages. It is a cool book that has nothing to do with the author. That's why I love it. That's why I can brag on it. So pick it out when you guys are at the bookstore next time. On Fire. It's going to rock your world. It's going to rock your world. So I want that to go forward and touch a lot more lives. What I'm working on right now, though, is I've noticed lately when I speak and I ask questions of audiences, they usually stare at me and they don't respond. When I say something like, how many of you have ever had a bad day, which we all know all of us should have our hands up, they kind of sit there with their arms crossed. So then I compare the way audiences look to me as a speaker with the way audiences look when I'm with first graders. When I ask a first grader a question, John Gordon, how many of those first graders will raise their hands? Every hand. They're so engaged. When I ask them, do you think the best days are in front of us or behind us? In front of us. Do you think you're an artist? Both hands go, yes, we're artists and we're going to be astronauts and we're going to change the world. And then I speak to them when they're seniors in high school and they're done. Their arms are crossed, their eyes are looking down, they're not participating, they're not engaging, they're not leaders anymore, but they were. And so what I'm currently working on is how to return to that childlike mindset and to give people that process that you can guide yourself through to return to the child you once were and still are.
I love it. That's powerful. It's going to be awesome. Tell me about faith. What is faith play? What role does faith play in your life?
Man, for me, it's the alpha and omega. And I realized, well, John, you live in a secular world, so you're on eggshells right now. Be careful, man. But I evangelize always. And on occasion, I'll use words. But I try to attract as many people as I can toward my faith, which my faith is in Jesus Christ. My faith is in a loving Father. My faith is in a personal relationship with a Savior. My faith is with a God who whispered, and the entire universe blew up. And somehow, 26 billion years later or whatever, here we are on earth, man, dancing around. And if that is your creation story, if you think you're here on purpose, it informs the way you get out of bed in the morning. And so I live, speak, and write, and work, and play in a very secular world, but I exude my faith in the way I dance into it. So my faith is important not only in my recovery story. Clearly, I think when you're in a foxhole, many of us turn toward prayer. But man, that's why the reason I want to show for your podcast and be all in right now is for God. The reason I want to impact even more lives is because I have received so much from my Father. And I want the world to be a little bit better tomorrow than it was today. And I think we all have that role. Maybe it's time we all
John, were you ever, I love what you're saying, John, were you ever angry at God?
Yeah. I mean, when you ask the question, why me? Who are you asking that to? I don't care if you have a faith walker or not, or a dogma that you follow, a spiritual guiding light. When you say, why me? Who are you talking to? It's kind of my problem with atheism. Like, who are you asking the questions of? Where did life originate? Nothing comes from nothing. They can say this. So where did you come from? When you say, why me? Who are you directing that toward? And so for me, when I spent years and maybe even decades, if I'm really honest about it, saying, oh, why me? Why will I ever find a girl? Will I ever be able to stand upright? Will I ever be employed? Will I ever find confidence? Will I ever find work that matters? I'm in physical pain, John, today. I'm 41. I got a big old grin on my face, and it's sincere. But dude, every morning, it is hard to get out of bed. And it is easy to say, why me? What I do now is I ask a completely different question. Okay, it informs how I get out of bed. It informs how I love my bride. It informs how I serve my kids. It informs how I show up and serve and write and work. The question I ask every morning, you may want to write it down at home. Why me? Why am I alive? Why am I so blessed? Why am I so highly favored? Why do I have the honor of not only speaking in front of John Gordon and carrying his water and bag 9 years ago, but now calling him my friend? Why do I have the great pleasure of living here in St. Louis, Missouri, where spring has finally sprung? The trees out my office window are flowering. We have a little pool in our backyard. We open it up. I'm about 2 weeks away from jumping in with the kids. Why me? Why me? And that allows me to dance out of bed, to sprint toward the shower, to be grateful for the warm, clean water, and to get after my day.
That is powerful, John. I'm speechless right now. It is so powerful. One last thing, your wife, did you ever think you would find love like that? And did you ever believe you would have 4 amazing children?
So the answer, oddly enough, the answer is yes, kind of, to your question. When I was a little boy in a hospital, I think if you ladies and gentlemen want to see these pictures, they can go to my website where we list them, not to make you feel bad, but actually feel good. I was a beat down little boy with no skin. It's an ugly, sad image. But even then, in the bandage changes of my life that happened daily, I knew someday I would find love. I didn't know her color of skin. I didn't know her religious creed. I didn't know her political affiliation or her citizenship or her passport, her color of hair or eyes, or all of it, dude. I knew her heart. I knew she'd be the kind of lady who would see through the crap that others cannot get past. Scars, brokenness, missteps, imperfection everywhere, not only in my body, but in my life, man. There's my story in a nutshell. I just didn't know how beautiful she'd be. But I knew her heart. And I met Beth. She's my wife. Her name's Elizabeth Grace. We met in college. Dude, I fell in love with her right away. Asked her out after like a year of stalking her. And I remember she looks back at me and says, "John, you're like a brother to me." Which was not her way of saying yes. Like, I'm all in on this. It was her way of saying it ain't happening. But when you know your why, you can endure anyhow. Another year passes. I ask her out again. She gives me that same lame answer. Nothing's changed. You're like a brother. But then a year later, John, what shifted for me is I stopped pursuing Beth for me. I stopped sexualizing her. I stopped seeking her because she would cover some weakness in my life. Like in the reality, if I really am honest, looking back on it, seeking her was about me, not me filling her. And then for a year, I just spent a year being her friend and like loving her purely. And in doing so, I wasn't doing this on purpose, but in doing so, I think it changed her heart. It changed the way she saw me. She asked me out. I said, yes. We dated for 3 years. We've been married for 14. We have an awesome marriage. It is work. If you have any relationship at all, it's work. But ours is worthy. It's a good one. We have 4 little kids. I can't believe I get to raise and love 3 boys. Jack is the oldest, named after the announcer, Patrick Henry, and their little blonde sister, Grace. Goes back to my opening shot across your bow. I have an awesome life. I'm extremely blessed.
Did Jack get to meet Jack Buck?
No, but the cool thing about Jack is Jack has now met Joe Buck. And the great thing about this story is when you speak as frequently as you and I do, whispers come back to the children who were raised by a guy named Jack Buck. I haven't met all of Jack's children. I met many of them. I've met Jack's widow, Carol. We are dear friends. I've met Jack's son, Joe. Many of you know Joe. Joe's a dear friend. And how cool for them to randomly be in line at Starbucks grabbing a coffee where someone approaches them and says, "Hey, I got to let you know, I didn't know what an awesome dad you had. And now that, I know where you get it from in your own life." And so I feel like our messaging today is one of the ways that we help keep that incredible life-giving legacy alive and well. And not only in Jack Buck, but in those of us who choose to be bold enough to ask questions through the positive lens of what more can I do? What more can I do to make tomorrow better than today?
I love it, John. I really appreciate you being on this podcast with me. Thanks so much. And just keep doing the great work you're doing. Keep changing.
John Gordon, you're the best, man. I am a follower, a fan, and a friend, and fortunate to be all of those.
No, I'm honored to have you with us. And man, it's just beginning for you. Just beginning. The best is yet to come. I'm excited.
Amen, brother.
I have 2 children now that are going to college. One's in college. The boy's going to college next year. And so you're on your way.
I don't know if I'm looking forward to that. I'm in the in-between stage right now. They're out of diapers and not into cigarettes. So I'm just savoring this middle ground, 6 to 12. I got them for like 3 more years where they think I'm cool, where they sit on my lap, where they want to swim with their dad. And so we'll get to we're saving for college, but I'm living in the day right now.
Enjoy this time. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.